Hey everyone, I'm here with David Hildebrand challenging Dianne Feinstein for her Senate seat in the state of California. David, how's it going?
Great. Busy, been all over the state, but I'm happy to be on.
Glad to have you on. So I wanted to ask you, what made you challenge Dianne Feinstein? Because I think there's probably like thousands of reasons why she is not a progressive or even a liberal. But what made you ultimately decide to run?
The final thing in the very beginning was that no one else was willing to go against her. So you probably already are aware that I started running in March 2017, and we were filling up slots for our locality, all the districts that I live in, with people to run against various people that we wanted to replace. So all those slots were basically full. And no one was going against Feinstein. So I decided, you know what, if no one's going to go against her, then I'll run. And so in March, I went ahead and threw my hat in the race because I believed that we needed a corporate free option on the ballot. And I knew as a progressive, we needed to start very early and get our footprint, very wide to where we could actually have a chance against, Feinstein's billions or millions at least that she's going to put into her own election fund.
Right, I know that she's self-funded. I believe like 5 million or something, just crazy like that. So, yeah, I think that's smart to get started early. I wanted to ask you a little bit about yourself, and specifically like your background, your career, any previous political activism. What do we need to know about you specifically?
Yeah, so I have a ton of experience in legislation. First of all, I graduated at Sac State with a political science degree. They call it government there. I just like to specify that. But it's the same degree. I went through an internship with AFSCME, which is a union. I was lead legislative intern there, was there for over a year. It was a full-time paid position, so we dealt obviously with labor issues, especially like in-home health services and stuff like that. After that, I actually started working for the Department of Motor Vehicles as a legislative analyst there. So I've been doing that for 7 years now. So if you put a bill in front of me, I can basically digest the whole thing, tell you the fiscal impacts, the policy impacts, whether it's good or not, whether it solves the issue, or whether it's a waste of money. And a lot of times we have legislators, because of deadlines, throw stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And it's really not a good idea at the end of the day. So you'll see a lot of bills die going through the process. So I'm actually in depth into that, system right now on the state level. So I would just be transferring that to the federal level. For activism, I've been, as you can see behind me, you can see a few of my posters up, but I've been in the field and in the streets for many different issues, for rent control, for police reform, a lot of different issues, especially like single payer healthcare. I've been actually I debated single payer healthcare 12 years ago in college, and I've been a proponent ever since. So the main reason I worked for Bernie, which is the next thing, is was on the Bernie Sanders campaign here in Sacramento area. The main reason I was is because of single payer. I started off phone banking. I hate phone banking, so I went immediately to canvassing. Ended up being the canvas lead for my precinct. When we were done walking and knocking every door in our precinct, I went on to the county office and then on to the Bernie Sanders office when the official campaign came in town, and became the staging location director for the entire Congressional District 6, which is a huge district. We knocked quite a bit there, and I was the guy who headed out that effort and actually got the people to the doors. So that was over 70 hours a week in the Bernie Sanders office on top of a full-time job, which is the legislative analyst position. So not only do I have the experience and the education and the legislative side, but also in the campaign side. After that, I helped out with a local school board campaign because I really didn't have an interest in the general election when it came to president, because we didn't have anyone in the game.
Yeah.
So I helped out with a local progressive race. After that, I jumped on the SB 562 campaign. I re-registered as Dem because one thing I didn't say is I actually was part of the Dem exit movement early on, right after the California primary. I re-registered Dem and helped out with the ADEM elections, vetting different candidates from all over the state, all the way down to San Diego, for ADEM positions within the party to try to take over the party. I promoted Kimberly Ellis when she was running for the chair here in California to take over the party. She came within less than 60 votes of taking that position, which would have completely revamped the whole party in California. So I've been in this for a long time. I go out to the streets, shut down the arena for Stephon Clark. I don't mess around. I'm the activist that gets out there. I don't change the way I do things because I'm running for office. I continue to do the same things. So we're down there facing off with the police, at the arena, shutting it down to send a message. And I don't care if that gets bad press. That'd probably actually help me. But if that gets bad press, then that gets bad press. But we need to get the message out there that we can't stand for this sort of brutality anymore.
Right. I wanted to ask you kind of about the press situation, because it seems like the way that it's portrayed in media is that there's only one progressive in the race, and it's not you, it's not Allison Hartson, it's Kevin De Leon. That's how, if you look at articles in Politico, he's mentioned as the progressive. So I asked Allison Hartson about the Media Blackout, and I wanted to ask you the same thing, because you are two very progressive people running, but the only individual who is even referenced at all as someone who's progressive is Kevin De Leon. So can you explain, is Kevin De Leon progressive? I know that he's probably to the left of Dianne Feinstein, but he's nowhere near a standard progressive like Bernie Sanders, is he?
So basically, he has had a whole entire career of accepting corporate donations. He has accepted corporate donations in this race. His campaign and his subordinates and whatnot will tell you he hasn't. But actually, someone questioned me when I said he was a corporate candidate on Twitter, and I produced 2 different corporate donations just within 5 minutes of searching that he's taken for this campaign. So in the Senate, or the state Senate, he accepted money from Raytheon even. So,
wow.
I mean, if you're taking money from corporations like that, then they already have their foot in the door, whether or not you claim to be progressive now. So at the end of the day, is he progressive related to Feinstein or relative to Feinstein? Yeah, he's a progressive in that light. But when I define progressive, the number one thing I look for is corporate free.
Yeah.
As for the media blackout, if you don't have a ton of money, or sometimes even if you do, but you're not in an inner circle, you won't get it. You won't get any media coverage. And you can see actually how biased it is by looking at who the newspapers and news agencies are endorsing. So like LA Times and SAC-B, SAC-B, my hometown, both endorsed Dianne Feinstein. So, it's the same power, center in the same, position doing that. The thing I take issue with is when progressive media organizations only support one candidate in each race when there's multiple candidates in the race. So that's also an issue we need to address. I understand slates and understand, groups getting together to endorse, but if we're going to be a media organization, we should cover everyone. That includes people like Patrick Little, the neo-Nazi, include everyone. Because when we include people like that, it automatically undermines their campaign. And then we can take forward, the actual positive progressive people that actually are going to make the change in California.
Sure. With that regard, do you think that the same type of media coverage should be extended to independents and Green Party candidates too?
Yes, I'm open to any parties. Basically, we have different efforts going on right now in different parties going forward. As long as we're going forward and not slitting each other's throats, I think that's great.
Right.
We all are on the same platform, basically. The Green Party, progressive, corporate-free Democrats, even Peace and Freedom and independents, we're all in the same, boat. We just need to make sure we're going forward and not punching to our sides and knocking each other out of the races. Like in my my race for U.S. Senate, there's no Green Party candidate. So I was hoping that Greens would jump on board and support a progressive candidate in the race, but instead they went and joined with Peace and Freedom and supported a candidate that is actually not viable and can't campaign because they don't have any money. So that's where we start slitting each other's throats, and we can't win on that basis by our own votes, basically. So there's this mentality in some of the left that we can win just with our votes, and that's not the case.
Right.
So we need to reach across the aisle. We need to develop coalitions and build coalitions across California that put forward people not dependent on their party. So to show that I'm actually reaching out to the different parties, I've actually endorsed a Green and 3 independents. So Gail McLaughlin being the most notable one. She's also endorsed me in my race. So we co-endorsed. So, that's the importance that I'm putting on this is I don't care if I'm going to get kicked in the teeth by the party for endorsing outside of the party, because there's no rules against it. And we currently have Democrats who are endorsing Republican sheriffs and DAs in California, well-known, quote unquote, progressive Democrats who are doing this. So if anyone wants to say anything against me for promoting Gail McLaughlin, I'll just tell them, take a hike. because they're promoting, DAs and sheriffs who are shooting, African Americans in the street who have cell phones in their hand or in their own yard.
Right.
So these are the kind of people that are being promoted by Democrats, in the leadership of the party. So we need to reach across those aisles and actually make a unified force on the left. Otherwise, we're not going to win at the end of the day.
What prompted you to run as a Democrat? Because you mentioned Demegs, and I know that party label isn't necessarily something that you care about, and it's certainly something that I don't care about either. So what do you think the benefits are with running in the Democratic Party, even if they typically like to stack the deck against progressives?
Yeah, so it's a California thing. Basically, when I started off, I had the option to run independent or Democrat. The most of the actual force behind the progressive movement in California is running as a Dem-enter inside the party, and there's very little going on outside the party. There is some really forceful efforts, but just the numbers aren't there. So running Democrat inside the party as a corporate-free progressive was actually the only way to really go. And also in California, basically people vote Democratic even if they register something else. So we have a lot of people in California registered no party preference. I think it's like 37 Democrat, 25 Republican for percentages, and then the no party preference, I think it's bigger than Republicans now.
Wow.
On election day, they all voted for Hillary at 60% to I think it was 60% to 27%. For Trump. So at the end of the day, they still vote Democrat, even though they're not necessarily in the party. So having that D next to my name was actually strategic. Now, a candidate like Gail McLaughlin, she doesn't need, to go through the extra loophole of doing that necessarily. I actually talked to her about that early on, and she chose the independent route. However, she has history behind her and name recognition already, and she used to be a Green. So to get, a lot of endorsements from other organizations and other parties, hers was the best way to go, or independent was the best way to go for her. So see, it's basically just a strategy at the end of the day. So if Dem-enter doesn't end up working in California over the next couple of years, that strategy may change and we may do something completely different. But at this point, I really think the Dem-enter is the way to go, at least until we find out what happens in the next chair race. So we're really pushing hard to take over the Democratic Party. Like I mentioned, we're within 60 votes of doing that. So we just need to push forward. And when we get actual progressives into office, they have appointed delegates that can then take over that system. So that's one of the reasons that people right now are running for office is because they'll get the delegates allotted to them through the Democratic Party. So we can actually vote with our delegates against the corporatists in the party. And remember, we only need, less than 60 votes more to get that chair seat. So that's what we're really looking at right now as a strategy. So it's an inside-outside strategy, one, inside the party, taking it over, and two, outside the party, how people actually vote. Right.
And you also probably avoided the inevitable, but he's not a Democrat argument from establishment figures.
And for me, I would love to get that sort of attention from the news media telling everyone I'm not a Democrat, but it's not going to happen. They're well aware, Democrats and the news media are well aware that California is very much a no party preference state. It's the fastest growing voter registration is no party preference. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that would actually be good for my campaign for someone to, say, he's not a Democrat. But at the same time, when it comes to the average voter, they're not going to probably see those news pieces, even if they did exist. And they're going to vote based on what they see on the ballot and based on their own research when they get their ballot.
Right. I wanted to ask you about, because you're running in the Democratic Party, theoretically, when you choose to run in one of the two major parties, or really any party, there are a lot of benefits that are entailed with that. You get access to voter data, for example, NGP Van. You get access to different resources and tools that can help you. Have you felt as though the race has been fair? Because I've spoken with progressive candidates across the country in Washington, and I've been told that they don't feel as though the race is fair. Like, they've got their access to NGP Van cut off, or they made them jump through hoops. Sarah Smith in Washington is an example. Do you feel as though it's been fair?
It hasn't been fair, but not for the reasons you stated. In California, we don't use NGB ban on the party level.
Mm.
And also, the party does not give free access to software to any candidate.
Okay.
So from the get-go, we're not even there, basically. So we have a completely different system, for-profit based system that you have to pay to use. So it's actually cheaper to use products outside of that system.
Right.
A lot of people don't even like the system we have. So I even forget what it's called because no one even uses it. So people use, private vendors that are cheaper than that. The voter file, like I got the statewide voter file from the Secretary of State's office for $30.
Mm.
So that's not the issue. Isn't the voter file? The issue is paying for the software. That's where it gets really expensive. As for the not fairness aspect of it, you have to have a ton of money to run for office. So if you want to even apply for the party's endorsement for U.S. Senate, you have to pay $1,000 an application fee.
That's
if
insane.
you want to table at one of the e-board meetings, it's $500. If you want to table at convention, it's $1,500. Just to get on the ballot in California for a U.S. Senate race, it's $3,480. And to put a full candidate statement in the voter guide, it's $6,250.
Wow.
So right now, we're already looking at $15,000, $20,000 just to do the bare minimum to apply for an endorsement with the party and just to get on the ballot and in the voter guide. So these are expenses, the grassroots campaigns like mine, we can't just pull all that off and, still travel around the state, and visit different groups. So we focused a lot more on traveling around the state and actually talking to people. We've been to like Chico 8 times. We've been to Southern California. I think it's like 30 times now. Bay Area, all over the place, Central Valley, all far Northern California. On Saturday, I was in Mount Shasta and Redding. Sunday, I was in Chico. I've been to Eureka even. So we've been all over the place.
Wow.
On really, really small funds. So I think what we're building right now is a blueprint for progressive campaigns. So even if you have more money, you don't necessarily need to use that money. So it's about budgeting, wisely and making choices, hard choices when you have to.
Right. Now, I do want to ask you, because I know that you're progressive, and for the most part, we probably agree on every policy. But if you were elected, what do you think would be your policy priorities? Because this is something that I always think about for myself. Like if I were elected, hypothetically, to the Senate, I don't even know where to begin. So what do you think you would start with? What would be a couple of policies that you would prioritize?
Yeah, so number one for me, it's because it's my personal pet project, basically a single payer. I would co-sponsor any single payer bill that was put forward. Obviously, there's a couple different ones put forward now, Bernie's and Conyers bills. So I'd co-sponsor any bill that's already in for single payer. And if there wasn't, then I'd author one myself.
Nice. That's good.
So that's my number one goal. And the reason why that is because my number two goal is getting corporate money out of politics. But I think there's enough of a movement behind single payer that we can actually pass that legislation before we end corporate money into politics.
Yeah.
And that's a lot longer of a battle. So as I said, number two, or it's not even number two, they're pretty even basically in my eyes. Getting corporate money out of politics, and not just by ending Citizens United, but by instituting publicly funded elections and by taking corporations and union donations out of the system. Because if we only do corporate donations in a publicly funded election system, then that'll never pass because the other side won't allow it to if we still allow union donations. So what I'm talking about is like a separate fund that money goes into, and that is used for candidates in different races. So what we would have to do in this situation, in a publicly funded election situation, is have higher signature requirements for different offices. So like right now, to get on the ballot in California, I only have to get 100 signatures. So we would have to raise that, to make sure that people actually had popular support. And that would also tamp down on the case. Like right now, we have 32 people in my race. We have 27 people in the governor's race. So it tamps down on having too many people on the ballot because a lot of people just want to put their name on the ballot just for the heck of it. So they'll drop the money to put their name on the ballot. And that's the end of their campaign, basically, is just getting on the ballot. So it really waters down the votes at the end of the day, and they're really not real choices.
Right.
So a single payer and getting money out of politics, but also establishing a public finance election system. Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of other issues that I want to push forward, tuition-free college and trade schools, and a fair living wage, basically, starting at $15 an hour, which I have a more detailed plan about that as well. But those would be the top two.
I like it. It sounds good. So tell us, before we leave, where we can find you, and if there's any way we can help, if somebody's listening and what you said resonates with them, are we able to phone bank for you or canvas for you? What can we do to get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So through my website, you can sign up to volunteer. But since we're like literally 11 days out from Election Day, right now we're just throwing everything out there. So if you email us at info@davidforcalifornia.com, which is the word for, not the number, we will actually send you a big stack of flyers, and you just go out and just plaster everywhere you know that's a good area. The reason why we're doing this at this late hour on top of our regular canvassing is because during the Bernie campaign, there was a lot of complaints from local activists how the Bernie campaign came in and kind of told everyone where to canvass, and the locals knew where the good spots were to canvass and who they could actually win over, and they were ignored. This happened in Sacramento. This happened in Alameda. So during that process, a lot of doors weren't knocked that could have been swung to Bernie. So what we're doing now is we're giving volunteers both the typical canvassing operation and then the knock every door operation, where we just literally give you materials and say, go. If you know what to do, we're not going to question it, go. Because we want to make sure everyone's included. We want to make sure all the doors that people believe should be knocked are knocked. So like I mentioned, info@davidforcalifornia.com to get materials. We'll send out a stack of flyers and a stack of bumper stickers.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.